Right. Good morning. I'd like to welcome everyone to this remote meeting of the Healthier Communities Overview and Scrutiny Committee, which is now open to the press and public on request. It is not practicable for this meeting to be broadcast live. However, a recording of this meeting will be made available as soon as possible after the meeting has concluded. We welcome the use of the Welsh language at meetings. I have had no requests for people to speak Welsh today, so this meeting will be conducted in English only. Please can members refrain from using the chat function and instead use the raised hand icon to indicate when you want to speak. Please remember to keep your microphone muted when you are not talking. Please do not interrupt discussions until you have been notified of your intention to speak and have been invited to do so. Moving on to the agenda. Agenda item 1, welcome and apologies. Well, I've given the welcome, so Geraint, do we have any apologies?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we've got apologies from Councillors Len Constance and Sue Molson.
Thank you, Geraint. Agenda item 2, declarations of interest. Rebecca, could you please ask members in alphabetical order to state whether they have any interest to declare?
Thank you, Chair. So if we start, Councillor Crick, please.
Thank you, Rebecca. None to declare.
Thank you. Councillor Mike Jeremiah?
Yes, Chair. I got a personal and prejudicial interest in item 5, and under legal advice, I will have to leave the meeting.
Thank you. Councillor Fay Jones?
I am on foster panel, but as a county council and a corporate parent, I'm not sure that is a clash or not.
We'll note that down, but that's not a prejudicial interest, I wouldn't.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Janet Jones?
Nothing to declare.
Councillor Overton?
Nothing to declare.
And Councillor Seaborn, please.
Nothing that I'm aware of to declare.
Thank you.
Okay. So next item on the agenda is minutes of the last meeting. Rebecca, could you please ask members in alphabetical order to state whether they agree that the minutes are a true and accurate record of the meeting?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So if I go through members in alphabetical order, so Councillor Crick, please.
Yes, agree.
Thank you. Councillor Jeremiah?
I wasn't at the meeting.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fay Jones?
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Janet Jones?
Agree.
Thank you. Councillor Overton?
Agree.
Thank you. And finally, Councillor Seaborn.
Yes, agree.
Thank you.
I move.
Okay, agenda item 4. Oh, I record that the minutes are accurate first. And agenda item 4, action sheet. Rebecca, could you please run through the action sheet?
Yep, certainly, Chair. Just bear with me while I find that. So members, you'll see there are a few outstanding actions there that arose at the last meeting regarding managing housing demand in Torfaen. Those are still being actioned at the moment. So once I have any updates on those, I will forward those on. And then the last couple are with regards to recommendations, and you've had that information. So apart from those few that are still being actioned, I've nothing further to update on that. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Members, do you have any questions regarding the action sheet? No? Okay, so we'll move on to the main part of the agenda, which is the T22 review of the family placement team. Before we commence discussions, I would like to welcome Jason O'Brien, Head of Children and Family Services, and also Jacqueline Richards, Group Manager, Children and Family Services, who will be presenting the report today. I'd also like to welcome Councillor Fiona Cross, the Executive Member for Children, Families and Communities. I'll now hand over to Jason to give a brief introduction to the report.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. First of all, a slight apology in that my camera periodically freezes. So if it does, whilst I'm resetting it, I'm still here, I'm still able to talk, and I'm still able to listen. And it'll take just a second, but it periodically freezes. Thank you, Chair. I'm joined, as Chair's pointed out, by my colleague, Group Manager Jacqueline Richards. I'm going to give just a very brief overview, and then I'm going to ask Jacqueline to talk us again briefly through the report, and then obviously for any comments or questions from members then. So at present, Children's Services is working its way through a significant programme of transformation. That programme of transformation aims to manage demand across the whole expanse of the service in order to impact upon staff capacity, financial pressures, our overall children looked after population, and importantly, or more importantly, to improve the outcomes for children and young people. As I've pointed out, the programme is significant, and it's made up of numerous work streams with a particular focus, but all of which overlap with one another, in that the focus is to improve, as I've said, outcomes for children and young people and their families. The Children's Services Transformation Programme Board determined that one such area requiring a level of scrutiny and in-turn transformation is the family placement team, hence the compilation of an outline business case for change and transformation within that team. So the report that's before you today outlines the key functions of the family placement team, whose dominant responsibility, amongst other things, is to recruit and support foster carers. It's well documented that the children looked after population has increased significantly in the past 10 years. And whilst Torfaen has been effective in recruiting foster carers, demand far exceeds supply. And there's a continued need to use IFAs, independent fostering agencies, which cost the local authorities significantly more than in-house placements via the agency fees that are attributed to those placements, and can often see children being placed out of the local authority area. I think it's commendable that Torfaen has always managed to maintain a high proportion of in-house foster carers that exceeds the national average against independent foster agencies. But with increased demand over the years, that proportion has declined. Despite the increase in the looked after populations and the looked after population, the functions and the makeup of the family placement team have not been through a wholesale review in recent years, and so staff capacity and the ability to provide a premier level of support and focus on recruitment has been adversely impacted, I would suggest. This has resulted in the determination of the need for an outline business case, as is highlighted within the report provided to scrutiny this morning. I'll hand over to Jacqueline now, who can take us through some of the finer detail of the report. I would point out, and I would say this, that I think the report is commendable in terms of its content and the quality of the report, and I hope that'll afford members the opportunity to ask the appropriate questions as we go through.
Thanks, Jason. Good morning, members. I don't plan to go through the report verbatim unless members would like me to do that. I just wanted to point out some of the key points within the report. And I suppose for me, starting with the case for change, which I think is quite significant and highlighted within point 4.7 within the report, that if we continue with the current trend on the usage of independent fostering agencies, if we continue with that trend, then the proportion of in-house placements is likely to reduce to 74% within the next 3 years, which will create a budget pressure for children and family services in the region of £400,000 per year. And then the counter argument to that is that if we look to, we could look to make gross savings in the region of £800,000 by increasing our ratio of in-house placements to 90%. I think Jason has already highlighted that Torfaen, our proportion of in-house carers versus independent fostering agencies is already exceeding the national average. I think that's highlighted within the report as approximately 60% of placements of children placed in in-house placements. The next point that I wanted to highlight is in 4.10 in relation to fees and allowances for foster carers. And you'll note from that Torfaen currently pay our allowances in line with the Welsh Government national minimum allowances. However, our placement fee, which we're not required by law to pay, so that's the remuneration element, hasn't been uplifted since 2009-10. And you'll also note then from graphs 6 and 7 that there is a significant, Torfaen are paying significantly less than the other 2 local authorities in the region that we're able to directly compare with. We weren't able to provide a direct comparison with the other 2 local authorities in the region because they pay on a banding scheme. In 4.15, you'll see mention of the work of the National Fostering Framework and also a Welsh Government review of national minimum allowances. And I've included these within the report because I think they are important and significant in terms of any decisions that are made within Torfaen in relation to any increase in allowances or fees to foster carers, because there's 2 significant pieces of work that are ongoing that are likely to impact those fees and allowances. So the work of the National Fostering Framework is looking to harmonise fees to foster carers across the 22 local authorities in Wales. That piece of work is ongoing, and as I understand it, they're hoping to provide a full report and toolkit in relation to foster carer fees by the end of the year. But there won't be any obligation on local authorities to implement the proposals from the National Fostering Framework. But as I understand it, all 22 heads of service are in agreement with the principle in terms of harmonisation of fees across local authorities in order to avoid competition between the local authorities. The second piece of work then is the Welsh Government review of national minimum allowances, which we had hoped would conclude by the end of the last financial year, but it hasn't. And as I understand it, we're anticipating the outcome of that imminently, but I haven't received any specific timescales, and that looks specifically at the national minimum allowances and any potential changes to those. So obviously we will need to be mindful of those 2 pieces of work in any changes that we make internally as a local authority for our foster carers. I then wanted to highlight point 4.16 in relation to additional benefits for foster carers. We know that from some of the mapping work that we've completed as part of the review that there are other local authorities that are providing additional benefits above and beyond the fees and allowances to foster carer, which can include things like free parking or discounted parking within the local authority, discounted gym and leisure memberships, and also some local authorities and one local authority in Wales who have introduced a reduction in council tax rates for foster carers. We know that it's unlikely that we'll ever be in a position to compete in terms of the allowances paid by independent fostering agencies. And if we were to do that, the independent fostering agencies could quite easily then subsequently increase their rates, which would put us back in the same position. But I do think there are things that we can do as local authorities that aren't in the gift of the independent fostering agencies to do. In terms of then recruitment of additional social workers, in 4.24, I wanted to highlight some legal advice that's been provided by Afa Cymru. So in Torfaen, we currently have community support workers who don't have a social work qualification, who are responsible for supervising foster carers, alongside a number of social workers who are also responsible for supervising social workers. The regulations for fostering simply state that staff in the family placement team or fostering service, as it's referred to within the regulations, need to have the necessary skills, experience and qualification in order to supervise foster carers, and that's not specified. And we know that across Wales there are some local authorities who only have social workers supervising foster carers, and others, including Torfaen, who utilise community support workers to supervise foster carers as well. Afa Cymru have helpfully provided a legal advice notice in relation to the regulations, which concludes that necessary qualification, as referenced within the regulations, can only mean a social work qualification. So that's something that we need to consider as part of this review in terms of the staffing of the family placement team and who undertakes which tasks. Graphs 10 and 11 then highlight that caseloads in the family placement team are currently over what we would consider to be a reasonable target for social workers, and also the additional resources that we're currently drawing from community support workers, but more significantly, in my view, the additional capacity that we're having to draw from the recruitment and development officer, who is currently carrying a caseload of foster carers, which then takes that individual away from their substantive post and the time that they're able to focus on the recruitment and development of foster carers. I then just wanted to quickly highlight some of the issues in relation to marketing. So as part of the family placement team review, we utilised the skills and experience of a data analyst and the Mosaic tool. And we looked at our current cohort of foster carers, and what we found is that a current cohort of foster carers come from lower income families within the borough, which again would highlight the importance of the financial offer to our foster carers in Torfaen. Finally, I just wanted to come on to the implications. And you'll see in the final graphs the investment and returns options, and just coming back to the first point that I made, that the continuation of the current trend will result in a significant budget pressure for children's services if we do nothing. And I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you, members.
Before we move on to members' questions, I would like to ask the exec member, Councillor Cross, if she would like to make any introductory remarks.
Thank you, Chair. Well, Jacqueline has pretty much covered all the points that I'd actually written out for myself, so fair play. I think that what I would define this report as is proactive. I mean, Jacqueline has pointed out that we already have a higher than average number of carers, foster carers, but the trend is the key. Where we're going to end up if we're not proactive and then put these things in place. But all the other points that she's raised, the demographic of our carers, if you've seen the age range, and you know that there's a trajectory again as to what we would expect. So we need to recruit more. And the fact that you know, over a decade, for over a decade, that we haven't given an uplift in terms of those payments either. And I find it particularly concerning as well about our social workers being over capacity as to how we would define it. So, you know, really big chunky pieces of information there, not to want to lead you in any way, obviously, but that's where my concerns are. So thank you to the officers that have introduced this report, and thank you to members for seeing this item as well. I look forward to the debate and discussion.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Cross. I should like to move on to the period of questioning, and I am going to ask the first question. Can you provide us with a very brief overview of why the numbers of looked after children have increased significantly?
Oh, therein lies the $6 million question, Chair. I think we've not just within Torfaen, but across the vast majority of local authority areas, there's been an increase in the looked after population. I think that the factors that contribute to it are complex and multifaceted. So I couldn't sit here and say there's one particular issue we have within Torfaen that's contributing to our increase in looked after population. What we have been effective in doing through this programme of transformation, though, is within the last 18 months is stabilising that looked after population. So whereas previously we've seen a significant annual increase within our population, last year, for example, or previous years, we've seen an increase of some 15%. Last year, we saw an increase of just 0.7%. So the whole programme of transformation is being effective on safely managing our looked after population. Our focus, obviously, within Torfaen will always be the need and the ability to safeguard children and young people, and that will always be dominant in our decision making. But I think that the work that we've done within transformation has impacted upon, like I say, the increase. In terms of the question itself, I think some of the like I say, multifaceted in terms of the factors that contribute, but you could link them back to I think poverty, austerity, parental substance misuse, mental health issues and emotional health issues with parents. And parents themselves who you know will have had adverse childhood experiences that will have impacted upon their own future abilities to parent. I think it's also worth pointing out as well that I think there's early intervention and prevention is part of our strand within transformation, and what we need to be doing in order to impact upon the future generations really is really investing in that early intervention and prevention to prevent families and children escalating to the point where we have to intervene at the statutory level. You know, that's the last thing that we want to be doing, is intervening at that statutory level, and what we want to be doing is enabling families and communities to resolve their own problems without the need for that level of intervention.
Okay, thank you very much. You succinctly answered the question, even though it was a very difficult question. So I'd like to move on to Councillor Janet Jones, who will ask the next question.
Chair, I've got a supplementary for Jason.
Sorry, Councillor Seaborn.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry to interrupt. Just a comment on the numbers. Do we expect it to further increase because of COVID and the isolation that our families have been under, not attending school, etc.? Are we expected to have an increase in the referrals once we get back into some kind of normality?
For me, I think the simple answer is yes. I think it's been described since we came into lockdown initially. There's been a description of, you know, almost a wait in a tsunami of referrals to come through the door, particularly for a period of time as I guess one of our key referrers in terms of education. You know, children weren't going to school, so there was a key referrer there that wasn't in place for us. As schools have gone back, we have seen an increase in referrals coming through, but I don't think it has represented the again, coming back to the word, the tsunami that was anticipated. I think what we will see, and what we are seeing, is more complexity in terms of the emotional well-being for children and families, particularly as, through those periods of isolation. And I think what we're likely to see is more a drip effect of the impact that the last 12 months will have had on families, rather than a blast of referrals coming through the door. And I think that the impact upon children through that level of isolation over the last 12 months in terms of their emotional health and well-being is going to be significant. And like I say, I think we will see a drip effect in terms of referrals.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Jones, your question was almost identical to
yes.
to Councillor Seaborn's supplementary question. Do you still want to ask yours, or are you satisfied to receive the answer?
Yeah, I'd just like to ask Jason or Jacqueline about the impact that COVID has had on the family placement team. Obviously, it's put a lot of pressure on you, but could you give us a brief update on that, both of you, or either of you, please?
If I speak not just for the family placement team, but across the whole service, really, in many senses, COVID has had an impact upon capacity within the teams. I think for many reasons, but if for no other reason, then we've been enforced to work differently. We've had to change our way of working over the last 12 months. I think we've been quite effective in doing that, if I'm honest. But there has been a demand. We will have seen some staff sickness over the past couple of months as well, or the past 12 months, which will have impacted upon capacity as well. Anything particular there for you, Jacqueline, with regards to the family placement team?
Yeah, I was just going to comment on, the impact for foster carers specifically, with staff not being able to provide that direct face-to-face contact within their homes in the same way that they would have prior to COVID, and with very clear guidelines from Welsh Government in terms of how we function as children and family services, and the situations that would require us to actually go into a family home. So a lot of the work of the family placement team over this period has been done remotely with foster carers, which I've no doubt you'll all appreciate is not the same as having the social worker coming into the family home to be able to provide that direct support. So I do think it's had a significant impact. I think our foster carers have continued to do a fantastic job in really, really difficult circumstances, where some of them have been vulnerable themselves to COVID, or have other family members that they might have had caring responsibilities for who are also vulnerable. So I think they've continued to do a really, really fantastic job in really difficult circumstances. What we've also found within the family placement team is that it's been more difficult to source placements for children and young people, because understandably foster carers are reluctant to take new placements if they don't know, for example, whether or not that child might be coming into the placement with COVID, albeit that they don't have any symptoms. We've had requests, for example, from some foster carers asking whether or not the child or young person can have a COVID test prior to coming into placement. And it's been really challenging for everyone involved.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Jacqueline and Jason.
Just as a supplementary to that as well, Councillor Jones, I think what we also need to recognise is, and Jacqueline touched upon it, is not just the impact upon the family placement team, but the impact upon the foster carers themselves. And they're very much an extension of our service. And without foster carers, the service would crumble. So I think it's worthwhile really acknowledging the impact that it's had upon social workers, the teams, the staff, and the foster carers as an extension of that team as well, and staff.
Yeah. And it was perfectly understandable. They were apprehensive, you know, with the COVID, and it has been very difficult situation. But thank you for your answers. Much appreciated.
Yes. Okay, I'd like to move on to the next question, and Councillor Seaborn is going to ask the next question.
Thank you, Chair. My question is to the executive member, Fiona. How are we responding and addressing concerns from Welsh Government with regards to our high numbers of looked after children? And how much support do you receive from our MP and AM?
Well, I'm pleased to say that I've been part of these sort of online forums, which I found to be very effective with other leaders throughout Wales. As you know, I've only had the portfolio for a little over a year, but through these meetings and through offices, I've managed to learn very quickly the needs of our service here specifically, but the wider issues across Wales as well. And we do share a lot of them. So in more recent times, because of those dialogues and because of my own expression of sort of frustration as to where we go next in order to enable our foster carers, our children that are in care, to have the best outcomes possible, members have now started having workshops. So we've had one workshop so far where a number of examples of excellence throughout Wales have been shared, you know, really positive stories as to how they may have turned their situations around. One of which is very similar to the way that I read it and understood it, is similar to our MASH service, our multi-agency service, which is something similar to what Cardiff are doing. Now, I wasn't aware of that, so these networking events are really helpful for having that cross-pollination and learning. In terms of our MP and our AM, I hadn't contacted our MP, to be honest. I didn't feel that he was the right person to directly contact, but I did contact Lynn Neagle some months ago. We had a meeting, Jason and I, with her, but this was very much driven by myself because I wanted to obviously make that connection. And as Lynn Neagle is someone who is you know, very involved in the children's situation, I feel that she's a fantastic ally. And so we've had a really good dialogue as to where we go, well, where we are now and where we go next. And we know that door is open so that we can continue to create that positive work together. Is that satisfactory for your answer there, Rose?
Yes, thank you.
And Jason, I'd like to come in.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say, I guess two parts to that in terms of the AM's input and support. That's been apparent for a significant period of time within children's services. Members will be aware of the Welsh Government directive in terms of safely reducing the looked after population, and we'll also probably be aware that Torfaen, one of the local authorities, didn't actually set a target for that because we felt that compromised elements of our decision making. Lynn Neagle has been highly supportive of that right from day one, and has really advocated on our behalf to Welsh Government for that as well. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. Okay, so moving on to the next question, and Councillor Faye Jones is going to ask it.
Good morning, everybody. I'd like to ask this question. In a sense, it's a little bit uncomfortable because I do feel that our foster carers are worth an awful lot of money, and in the reality of the real world, we need to pay everyone at a high standard. But I just wanted to ask, sort of looking at it in a slightly different way, with regards to our high number of looked after children, if we are looking at more monetary gain, are we at risk of choosing people who take on the role for financial gain and losing those who are dedicated to improving the lives of children and young people?
Okay, if I take that to start with, I think as a start, totally acknowledge the financial aspect of it. I think that, or what I would say is our foster carers go through a very rigorous assessment process right from day one. So from the moment that the person indicates they want to become a foster carer, they go through a very, very hefty assessment process. That assessment process pretty much pulls out the rationale and the reasoning behind them wanting to become foster carers. looks at their skills and abilities to become foster carers and what they could offer to a child's life. It also unpicks the financial elements of that individual or the family as well, to look at to look at incomes, outgoings, whether being a foster carer is affordable to them in many senses. That said, I think that what we can't expect is for we need foster carers to come into this role as a vocation in many senses. But what we can't expect, I guess, as you point out there, Councillor Jones, is that they would come into this without any financial reward as well. As I said earlier, we very much view foster carers as an extension of our service. As officers, we're salaried, and we get financial compensation for fulfilling our tasks, and so should foster carers. And for me, there's an element where I would expect foster carers to come into the role because there's an attractive financial package as well. But first and foremost, obviously, has to be that they're able to fulfil the role of a foster carer to meet the outcomes and to promote outcomes for children and young people.
Thank you, Jason. And Councillor Fay-Jones has the next question.
Looking at who fosters our children, we have an awful lot of children who are put within the family, which has excellent benefits, for who you are and how comfortable you're feeling.
Sorry, Faye, your volume is very low and we're straining ourselves to hear you.
Oh, sorry. Is that any better? I brought it closer. I can't find the volume button, but okay, thank you. I just wondered, we have a lot of looked after children who are looked after within their family kinship carers, and I just wanted, I'm sure this is the case, reassurance really that we're using the same strict standards to vet kinship carers as we are to vet carers who are not within the family. Thank you.
Do you want to take that one, Jacqueline?
Yeah, sorry, I was stuck on mute then. So the kinship carers and mainstream foster carers, they are the same competencies that they have to evidence in order to become foster carers. In terms of the assessment process, there are slight differences. So mainstream foster carers are assessed in line with the Form F. That's the technical term that we call the Form F assessment. Kinship carers are assessed in line with a assessment format that's been put together by the local Family Justice Board. So there are slight differences, but ultimately the competencies for a foster carer are exactly the same whether you're a mainstream foster carer or a kinship foster carer. The regulations for fostering also don't distinguish between mainstream and kinship foster carers. That said, there are complications because a mainstream foster carer is putting themselves forward to potentially care for any child or young person. And at the point that a mainstream carer is being assessed, there has not been a child or young person identified who will be placed with that mainstream foster carer in the event that they're approved as a foster carer. So the significant difference there for kinship foster carers is that kinship foster carers aren't individuals who've had the time to think about this and consider that actually they would like to be a foster carer. Kinship foster carers often come into our world then, because it is a different world, in an emergency situation when a child within their family requires care. They're not people who've sat down and thought, I'd quite like to be a foster carer, I'll pick up the phone and make inquiries about that and take my time over the decision. They're thrown into it. So it's different in that sense, but it's also different in the sense that when we're undertaking our assessments of kinship foster carer, there's a balance to be drawn, there's a balance to be made. And yes, they need to be able to evidence the competencies, but we also need to consider that in the event that this family member is not approved as a kinship carer, then this child will be placed with strangers. And we know that there's a wealth of evidence out there in terms of the positive outcomes for children and young people who are placed with their family members, and that there's more likelihood that that placement will continue. And I don't know whether members have ever heard the within our world the use of the term stickability. We need carers to have that stickability, and kinship foster carers are far more likely to have that because of the relationship that they've already got with the child or young person.
Okay, and Jason would like to come in?
Yeah, just to add to what Jacqueline said, really, there, I think with our kinship carers, as Jacqueline's pointed out, that desire and need to balance the needs of a specific child against a specific placement. What I would say is almost sometimes with the kinship caring function assessment process is almost an additional layer of scrutiny, because those kinship carers or that child will more than likely be going through the court processes as well. So the kinship assessment will be pretty much ratified by the court as well as through our internal mechanisms. What we have internally as well is as the agency decision maker, I sign off all carers, whether they be mainstream foster carers or kinship carers, and they will also go through our fostering panel. So there are layers of scrutiny that and layers of quality assurance that go throughout the system there, and ultimately the sign off that, you know, I guess to a bit phrase that the buck stops for me in terms of the sign off. So the final decision is made by myself as an agency decision maker.
Thank you for that.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Cross, if you wish to interject at any time, please raise your hand and I'll invite you to speak. We're not ignoring you. Raise your hand and then I'll invite you to speak. And the next question is from Councillor Seaborn.
Thank you, Chair. My question is, why are Torfaen carers receiving less than carers in Caerphilly and Newport?
Shall I hand that one to you, Jacqueline? I'm giving you all the difficult ones, aren't I?
I'm not sure how to answer that question, if I'm honest. I mean, it's for each local authority to determine the placement fee. I think I mentioned earlier that there is a legal requirement for all local authorities to pay the maintenance allowance, but there is no legal requirement to pay any remuneration. Of course, all local authorities do, otherwise I've no doubt that we would have far more children and young people in independent fostering agency placements than we do. I'm not sure I can give a clear answer in terms of why we pay less than the other local authorities. We do, and you'll see from the graphs within the report that it is significantly less in terms of a weekly payment in terms of the placement fee.
I think it comes back to that, as is pointed out within the report, you know, that uplift hasn't been reviewed or forthcoming year on year.
Thank you.
Yes. Councillor Crick, would you like to ask the next question, please? You're muted then, Veronica.
Mine's a two-parter, but it is linked and to some extent linked to the last question. What payment would a carer from an independent foster agency receive compared to what we pay? Are independent foster agencies charitable organisations? You know, we're all conscious of Bernardo's, and not for profit, or are they actually private organisations?
In terms of the first question, in terms of what foster carers within IFAs are paid, we don't actually know the actual rate that the foster carers themselves get paid, because when we pay the additional fees for IFAs, obviously there's an agency fee attached to that as well. Last going off, Jack, I probably, but the weekly fee we pay to an IFA is in the region of about, I think, £797 or thereabouts.
About 780.
I'll set it there. We are. So in the ballpark figure there. So you can see that is significantly more. But the vast majority of that, I would suggest, goes to the agency as an agency fee themselves, which links into the next question in terms of them being charitable or for profit. There are some charitable ones, but the vast majority are for profit. And that's not to say that the quality of their foster carers is no greater or any less than ours. And yeah, they are, a significant number of them are set up as profit-making organisations.
The only thing that I would add to that is that when you look at the differences in the differences that have been highlighted in the report between in-house and IFA, we have taken into consideration within the figure that we've included for in-house the cost of running the service. The reason that we've done that is because when we pay the fee to independent fostering agencies, we're also paying for that supervising social worker, for example, and the management of that supervising social worker by the agency. So all of that responsibility would go to the agency and wouldn't sit internally with the family placement team. So I think it's important to consider that when we're comparing those two figures.
So from what you're saying, that in effect is taking work away from us because they're dealing with it. And have you looked at that cost comparison and what impact it would have?
Yes,
if they came in-house?
Yeah, so we've covered some of that detail within the report. So, for example, if we were to increase our ratio of in-house carers to 90%, then as figures stand at the moment, we'd be looking to bring 17 IFA placements in-house. And if we did that, we would require an additional social worker in order to supervise those foster carers. So yeah, we are considering that as part of the review.
Yeah.
I would suggest that from a financial point of view, it would stay, well, as is pointed out within the report, it would still be cheaper to maintain in-house as opposed to buying within an IFA, albeit, like as you've pointed out, Councillor Crick, and as Jacqueline's answered, there are still those hidden costs because of the infrastructure that's built up around that placement with an IFA as well.
Thank you.
Sorry, could I just come in with a final point there? I think it also comes back to a point that Jason made earlier in relation to independent fostering agency placements. They're more likely to be out of Torfaen and potentially out of Wales as well. So I think those costs are things that need to be factored into that as well, but also the fact that then that means that children are being placed further away from their birth parents, which can pose difficulties in terms of ongoing contact. So I think there's a number of factors within the mix which have hidden costs, both in terms of outcomes and financial costs.
Yeah.
And also to point out, I think just to clarify, in that when a child does go to an IFA, even though there's that infrastructure of social work support built up around the placement, the child still remains a Torfaen child, so we still have and maintain the case responsibility for that child. It isn't a case of they move into an IFA and we lose all our level of responsibility. So we still maintain, I guess, the corporate level, corporate parenting responsibility and the legal status responsibility for that child as well.
So can that impact therefore in terms of legal work and so on within Torfaen if there are problems?
Not necessarily, because once a child is placed with, or by the time a child is placed with an IFA, more often than not, Oh no, I'll go. Not necessarily it wouldn't, because we will be going through the legal processes at the start. Once we have a care order on a child, for example, then, and they'd be placed with an IFA, there's no real legal input then. That comes down to case management and case practice and case decision making. So yeah, there wouldn't be any significant impact upon legal is I guess the short answer to that, Councillor Craig.
Okay, so it's just the corporate parenting aspect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to the next question, and Councillor Faye Jones is going to ask the next question.
Can I just put this question into context again? I'm very aware that we need a strict criteria in order to get the right people to foster. However, we did notice when we were looking through the stats that younger people don't seem to be fostering at the rate that older people are. And we were just wondering that when a person applies to be a foster carer, we know there's a strict criteria to be met. Do we feel that sometimes the criteria is a bit heavily weighted against younger people?
I would say, I don't know. I would say the simple answer to that is no. I think what we look for with any individual that comes through the door, any family that comes through the door that wants to embark upon the fostering role, is that we look at what they have to offer. Be they a single carer with, or single person with no parental experiences, down to, I guess, a family who will have had your standard 2.4 children grow up and walk through the door. We will take every individual and go taking them through that rigorous assessment process. And I think that's an acknowledgement as well of we have foster carers and people who want to become foster carers who have a wide range of different experiences and different skills. And similarly, we have a wide range of children within our looked after population with a wide range of needs and a wide range of backgrounds. So what we will always try and do is whenever we are assessing is to, or follow an assessment, is to match up a child with a placement as best we possibly can. So the short answer to that is no, we wouldn't. I don't think it's weighed against any particular cohort within, or any particular makeup of individual within our society.
Thank you. I thought not.
Okay, would Councillor Seaborn like to ask the next question, please?
Thank you, Chair. Are the benefits listed in 4.18 offered to Torfaen carers? And what other incentives could we offer people to encourage them to become foster carers? We have links with Torfaen Leisure Trust, Bronarvan, obviously the council tax issues. I wonder whether or not we offered the same sort of incentives.
Do you want to take that one, Jacqueline?
Yeah, sorry, I was stuck on mute again.
Yeah.
I did have conversations with Councillor Cross at the beginning of the pandemic in relation to some of the benefits that we could offer to our foster carers via Torfaen Leisure Trust, and that has been agreed. Unfortunately, those discussions in terms of timing were taking place during the pandemic, so we haven't shared that with foster carers at the moment, because it was at a time where we would be offering something that they wouldn't have been able to access in any event. In terms of some of the wider benefits, you'll note from the report in 4.17 that Torfaen foster carers used to receive a birthday allowance for each child placed in their care, and that a decision was made in 2015 to remove the birthday allowance as a result of budget pressures. And we know that 2 of the 5 local authorities in the region currently offer birthday allowances. We do offer a Max card to all foster carers if they wish to receive that, which gives them discounted nationwide attractions. In terms of council tax, that's not something that we've looked into in detail at the moment. As far as I'm aware, there's only 1 local authority in Wales who currently offer council tax discounts for foster carers. But at the moment, there are a number of benefits that are offered by other local authorities that we're not currently offering in Torfaen.
Can I have a supplementary, please, Chair? Have we had
Yes.
a discussion with our foster carers on perhaps what might help them? Sometimes a night off, you know, a babysitter or something like that helps. And I wondered whether or not we'd had any conversations with our foster carers in any suggestions that we might support them with.
At the beginning, when we started the family placement team service review, one of the first things that we did was to arrange consultation events with mainstream foster carers and kinship foster carers in order to seek their views on some of the current strengths, opportunities and challenges. I don't think it will come as a surprise to anyone that you know, the fees and allowances were an issue that was raised in terms of dissatisfaction for foster carers. There are foster carers who have talked about and are aware of other local authorities, particularly in England, who offer the discounts to council tax rates. I'm not aware of any other suggestions that foster carers have come up with, other than the point that you made, Councillor Seaborn, in relation to respite. It is really important to foster carers to be able to have that respite, and we do try to provide that wherever we can. But again, it's difficult. We need more foster carers who are able to provide respite to the mainstream and kinship foster carers.
Okay, Rose.
Thank you, Chair. Yes.
Satisfactory?
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay. Well, the next question is actually about dissatisfaction, and
Yes.
Councillor Janet Jones is going to ask it.
Yes, it's a question which we wonder how foster carers, as you say, it's come up about fees, but do you think that sometimes they're dissatisfied with the level of support visits they get? Can you tell us the length of the visits, and what type of quality of other support can they be offered? Obviously, they are really stressed on times, and respite care is obviously one of them. But can you give us some more information on the levels of support and the visits, please?
Yeah, certainly. So in terms of the regulations require foster carers who are in their first year of approval to have monthly supervision. Support can be provided in addition to that, but as a minimum, we are required to provide monthly supervision to all foster carers in their first year of approval. The regulations don't specify thereafter, after the first year of approval, how often supervision needs to take place, other than to say that regular supervision needs to take place. So our current policies within Torfaen are in line with the regulations. And stipulate that after the first year of approval, the frequency of supervision offered to foster carers should be in line with the foster carer support needs. And obviously that will depend on which children and young people they've currently got in placement, any other stresses and pressures that they've got on them at that point in time. What I would say is that we need to consider that it's inevitable that if the social workers have got caseloads over the target caseloads, then the decisions that are made in terms of the frequency of supervision to foster carers is going to be directly impacted by their capacity to be able to provide that support. I think that's inevitable. We know from the event from the consultation event with foster carers and from the survey that we completed with foster carers, that foster carers would like greater levels of support. What I would say is that is in slight contradiction with, sorry, that's my cuckoo clock going off in the background. What I would say is that that's in slight contradiction with the feedback that we receive from foster carers through the annual review process. So in Torfaen, we have an independent reviewing officer who chairs all of our annual reviews for foster carers. We're not required by regulation to have somebody independent undertaking that task, but we do. And the feedback that we get through the annual review process is that actually foster carers are happy with the support that they receive from the social workers and community support workers within the family placement team. So there is a slight mismatch with the information that we've been provided through the review process and then via the consultation event. Obviously, there were much fewer people, foster carers, attending the consultation event than we would have that feedback from the annual review process.
But obviously, if they require additional help, you are under the pressure that you have, they will get it. You can offer it after the first 12 months, can't you?
Yes is the simple answer, but I suppose to caveat that with obviously that the caseloads of the social workers will impact upon their ability to be able to respond as quickly as they might like to foster carers. So we would like to be able to bring caseloads down to a reasonable level so that social workers are able to be more responsive to foster carers at the point that they require support.
Thank you, Jackie. Thanks, Chair.
Can I come in, Chair?
Oh,
so in terms of that support as well, Councillor Jones, I think what is important to highlight is that foster carers will also receive support if they require it, or if it's required to sustain a placement, from things like our rapid response team and our family focus team, and also some foster carers will be aligned to our MIST service as well, which members will no doubt be aware of, which provides systemic and psychological support and input to placements for children with perhaps more complex needs, or placements that may be more complex. So there's that additional support as well that we put into foster carers, and additional, foster carers, coming back to Councillor Seabourne's question or comment earlier, also receive some respite as well. The same placements, and in recognition, that they need time off as well.
Yeah. Thanks, Jason. That's really what I wanted to hear.
Thank you. I'm going to ask the next question. And the next question is, conversion rates from inquiry to approval is 13%, which, although exceeds the average national conversion rate, still seems quite low. What figure should we be aspiring to, or should we be aspiring to any figure at all?
One for you, Jacqueline.
Yeah, sorry, my mute button is incredibly slow. The 13% is the national average. So I think the Torfaen figure for last year, and I can come back to members to clarify, but I'm sure for Torfaen it was approximately 16%. That conversion rate is taken from inquiry through to approval, and that's a really lengthy process. You'll get some individuals who inquire, and at the first point of inquiry, they're given information and they actually decide that it's not something that they thought it was. So you can get a number of individuals drop off at that point. We also once we've completed the initial visit to prospective foster carers, they attend a Skills to Foster course, which provides them with a wealth of information about the role of a foster carer and what that entails. And I think for some people who are making that initial inquiry, upon attending that course, they actually decide that it's not for them. There are obviously also other circumstances when we undertake our checks and references, and at very early stages within the assessment process, we might be determining that individual is not appropriate to be a foster carer. So there are a number of reasons as to why that conversion rate is as low as it is. What I would say is Torfaen have consistently our conversion rate has been consistently above the national average. In terms of what rate we would aspire to, I don't know. I'd like to think that, you know, if we were able to get better information out there to the public at an earlier point in terms of the reality of foster care, then perhaps we might that might ensure that at the point of inquiry, those individuals already have quite a clear understanding of what the role is, and then are more likely to follow through the assessment and approval process. But I'm not sure I could put a figure on what we would want that to be.
Okay, I understand that because it's multifaceted, that we can't actually be aspirational here. We've got to evaluate any new potential foster carers on merit, and so yes. So the next question is Councillor Seaborn is going to ask it.
Thank you, Chair. Delay on the microphone there.
Yes.
How well do we perform at retaining foster carers, and how stable is our baseline of foster carers? We did a few years ago a retention scheme on social workers. I wondered whether or not there was any kind of scheme on foster carers as well.
In terms of retention, I can provide more figures, more trend figures for longer term, but I think in the 1920 performance information, we had a net gain of 5 fostering households. And obviously that would have been more than 5 in terms of the number of actual placements. And off the top of my head, I think 2018-19 was the only year that we saw a net loss of foster carers. But otherwise, we've consistently seen a net gain.
Thank you.
Yes. So the next question is going to be asked by Councillor Crick.
Thank you. I'm looking at paragraph 4.33. At present, Torvine have 72 carers over the age of 51, including 5 who are over the age of 71. Does this create any issues with the number of younger children coming into the system?
Sorry, problems with my mic again. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we need to consider when we're placing any child or young person with a foster carer is if the plan is for that to be a long-term placement, then wherever possible, we want to avoid a child having to move from one foster placement to another foster placement. So that will be a consideration, for example, with very young children. And the same can be said when we're considering kinship carers. Is this placement going to be able to provide for this child until they reach adulthood? So yes, that is a concern, and it's why we've highlighted it within the report that obviously in terms of any placement matching, then the ability of the carers to provide for the children until they reach adulthood is a key consideration. And it's also why, as part of the fostering assessment, all foster carers have to undergo a medical. And that's then reported on to the fostering panel by a medical advisor in terms of the impact of any health concerns that applicant has upon their ability to care for children and young people.
So am I right in thinking you have 2 distinct groups in that case, the kinship and then the, I'm trying to think what the term is that you've used.
Mainstream?
Mainstream. They're quite distinctive groups.
No, I wouldn't say so in terms of your original question in terms of age. in terms of matching, we need to consider the ability of the carers to provide for the child or young person until they reach adulthood, and that's a clear consideration that we would make when we're matching children and young people with mainstream carers. Obviously, for kinship carers, the distinction being that assessment, that decision will be made during the assessment process, because we'll already know who that child is, whereas with mainstream carers, we won't have an identified child.
And what we would also look for, Councillor Crick, is if we were to have a child, for example, going to somebody within the older cohort, and we would look for the potential of legacy carers, so that if anything did happen to that child, there would be another family member who that child, not to that child, sorry, if anything happened to those foster carers, those kinship carers, or they were unable to continue caring because of any health issues, that there would be a legacy carer, so an additional family member who they would have strong links with, who they could move to there. So we'd be maintaining their identity, maintaining them within their family environment as well.
Oh, thank you.
So, Councillor Janet Jones is asking the next question.
Thank you, Chair. During COVID, we've heard of an increase in mental health issues, both with adults and children. But how confident are we that when we are placing children with the right carers to support their individual needs?
I mean, where possible, we do everything we can to match a child with a carer and a carer's set skill base. What we also do as well then is our utmost to ensure that the requisite services are provided for that child to maintain them in placement. So maybe the child may in terms of some of the emotional mental health issues there, we would ensure, if it was appropriate, for there to be CAMS involvement, as I've said, MIST involvement as well, really effective service. So we would look at pinning the different services around the structure of that foster carer to provide the support that they and the child in the placement would require.
Okay, thanks, Jason. I've also got the next question, Chair, so shall I move on?
Yes, you can move on to the next question, Janet, please.
Can you explain to the members what you mean by modest traditions and family basics?
Thank you. I haven't actually got the full mosaic profile in front of me with all of the details, but I think within the report I have highlighted some of the kind of key characteristics that these families are likely to have. So, for example, they're more likely to come from lower income families, which is why we've highlighted the importance of the financial offer. I'm happy to provide members with further information in relation to those two groups. What Mosaic also does is to give insight into how a particular person, and we need to be careful because it's not necessarily going to apply to everyone, but what it's saying to us is that typically these people will come from these groups, and these people will prefer to be communicated, for example, via telephone. They're less likely to be using the internet, or they'll respond better if you send them information via post, for example. So it will give us all of that insight, which can assist us in terms of our marketing and recruitment of prospective foster carers.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Janet. Okay, so I'm asking the next question. We are a little concerned that the team is under-resourced, both fiscal and personnel. Is this due to the historic team makeup that hasn't adjusted to increased workloads? Is it purely financial, or are there issues with recruitment?
All of the above, I would say. I don't know if you would agree with that, Jacqueline, but I think, yeah, that there's but part of it, I think it has been the increase in demand as we've alluded to, the increase in the children looked after population particularly, and the impact that's had upon the team. And up until this point, not having gone through a wholesale review of the functions and the staff makeup of that team. I think that's the broad answer. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, Jacqueline.
The only thing that I would add to that is I think whilst we can struggle at times with recruitment within children and family services, we haven't necessarily seen that within the family placement team, other than the fact that we've got a 0.6 vacancy. And the reason that we're struggling with that, I believe, is because it's a part-time position, and we haven't had the interest in a part-time position. However, when we have had vacancies for full-time permanent social workers within the team, we have had interest and we have been successful in recruiting within the family placement team.
Okay, thank you. And next question is a follow-on question from my question, and Councillor Faye Jones is going to ask it.
I would just like to ask, how well do we perform? I know you've partially answered this, maintaining staff within the team. Thanks.
We've recently had some staffing changes within the team. I would say that that's largely been as a result of social workers retiring. And we've successfully recruited into those positions. We don't see the same turnover of staff, high turnover of staff within the family placement team as we might see within some of the other teams within children and family services. And as I said, when we've put out permanent full-time social work positions in the family placement team, we've been successful in recruiting both internally, and when we've gone out externally, we've also received interest. We have had difficulty recruiting into the part-time post.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to ask the next question. The current spend on marketing is 4,000 per annum. What would be a more realistic figure for a spend on marketing?
I don't have the answer. I don't know if you've got a view on that, Jacqueline. I think with my area of expertise not being in marketing, I wouldn't want to put a figure on that. I think that's something that we continue to work on with our communications department and regionally and across Wales in terms of marketing. So that there's a piece of work being nationwide work being taken across Wales, looking at marketing and recruitment through that marketing process. But in terms of a figure, I'd struggle to actually put a figure on that. £200,000.
Yeah, I don't think I could put a figure on that either. That it was the consultant's view that was low. I do know that budgets for marketing across a lot of the local authorities is low, and I think it's referenced within the report that Welsh Government have put forward a significant amount of money nationally for the national rebranding of local authority fostering, and that includes regional marketing officers, so that should be a significant help for us.
Okay, so Councillor Cross has her hand raised. Like to come in, Fiona?
Thank you. I can't answer the question any more than the officers can. But I did think it was a wonderful opportunity to highlight some of the great promotion that's happening in Torfaen. Now, I'm probably going to say his name wrong, but Nathan Wyburn, fantastic artist. If anybody's had their vaccination at the stadium, they'd have seen a fantastic piece of work that he did out of the medical waste. I was fortunate to witness coming into creation. He's also doing a piece of work, or done a piece of work, promoting Foster Carers Week. So it's it's even more appropriate that this particular report has come to us today. But there's some very good work. I was really heartened to see that someone of such stature that I respect as an artist is promoting this piece of work. So well done to officers, whoever managed to pull him in.
Yeah. And Jason, like to come in again?
Yeah, just I mean, we've got loads of opportunities in terms of communication and marketing, and we through things like social media, which aren't that significant in terms of cost. One of the things we do know within Torfaen is a lot of our or a number of our foster carers join us and inquire through us through word of mouth. Through talking with other foster carers, which I think is testament, I think, to the quality of the service that is provided, albeit, you know, we've highlighted where that service can be improved. I think the fact that we have foster carers telling other people who then inquire to become foster carers and then go on to become foster carers is quite remarkable.
Okay, so thank you very much. And Councillor Seaborn is going to ask the next question, and it's quite a long question for her to read. Actually.
It is. I think I also asked a similar question in the cross-cutting overview. So the recommendation from the cross-cutting overview and scrutiny committee, the capping of external legal spend, members were concerned about how this budget would be managed if caseloads necessitated the need for further resources and sought reassurance that this wouldn't prevent cases from proceeding through the system. Has moving the children's social care legal budget to central resources had any impact? Or negative impact, I should say.
Okay, I can take that. As of yet, no. We've seen little, if any, impact because the transfer of that budget only took place within this current financial year. So the way that some of the legal spends will come through is to some cases we're still catching up with last year's spend because of the way external solicitors, for example, will invoice us and they may come late in the day. So at the moment, we haven't seen any quantifiable impact. The desire to move that budget was something that I instigated because what I felt was that the legal element, I was controlling a legal budget or legal responsibilities that, you know, I'm not a solicitor or have any legal training. So in terms of the decision making for the need to use external legal firms, I couldn't really make. And what I was doing ultimately at that point was just confirming the spend rather than confirming the need. So the anticipation is that by it being managed, by that legal budget being managed within the legal framework, is that the decision making will be stronger. Because that the individual will be able to determine the spend against the need, whereas all I was able to do at the point was to determine the spend and almost confirm it after the fact. So my anticipation is that it will be effective and we'll see have a positive financial impact. To what level, I don't know, but yeah, that was the driver for me to I guess to initiate that desire.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Crick, would you ask the next question, please?
Thank you, Chair. This is again from the cross-cutting ONS committee in recommendations. Members were extremely concerned with the continued difficulties being faced by the council supporting looked after children with complex needs. This is in terms of ensuring children with complex needs are provided with the best possible outcomes and the impact on overall budgets. Can you give us an overview of the financial pressures arising from supporting looked after children with complex needs and also out of borough care?
Okay. I mean, I don't think it's no secret that our significant financial pressure relates to the provision of residential care, out of county residential care for children. The costs there are, in my view, quite eye-watering, and that impacts so a small cohort of children and young people being placed in residential care has a significant impact upon our finances, and that's something, you know, in terms of complexity. The children who we do require the use of residential care for have complex needs, as you pointed out, Councillor Crick, and come, you know, with very complex backgrounds and life experiences. Ideally, our overall objective is always, whenever a child goes into residential care, is to sustain them and move them out of residential care as quickly as we possibly can. I think residential care serves a purpose. I've got a particular view that, you know, that doesn't serve a purpose in promoting longer term outcomes for children and young people, because I guess it promotes, you know, them becoming institutionalized and almost sets them up within a false environment. So we've got a project within Children's Services which is linked to our transformation work called the Stepping Stones Project, which has two strands to it, but one of those strands is around stepping children down from high cost placements and moving children down the system and de-escalating rather than escalating them up through up to high cost residential placements. We've been quite effective with a number of children in doing that over recent months, and I hope that project continues to be effective, because it has, like I say, it has an impact upon outcomes for children and young people. I think the children and young people are, obviously we all know the children and people are best supported within their own families if and when that's safe to do so, and then will be best off at the next level up, supported within a family placement. Like I say, we want to avoid them going through that escalation. So it's about promoting the outcomes of children and young people, but it's also about challenging or mitigating against the significant cost that residential placements cost us.
Thank you.
Councillor Janet Jones, will you ask the next question, please?
Yes, I will, Chair. We're all facing budgets, and you advise us that unless action is taken now, within the next 3 years, the pressure on our social services and the family placement is escalating. Bearing in mind that it's probably something that is faced by all other unitary authorities, what help can we get in extra funding from the Welsh Government to help alleviate some of these financial difficulties? And I know Fiona said she's working well with Lynn Neagle. Is there any pressure that you can put on her to get Welsh Government to give us any more funding, please?
Please.
So that's a question for me then.
Yes.
I can continue. I can continue very happily, and I will do trying to highlight these issues. I mean, the overall, we've got an overarching issue. It's not just on foster. This is one small part of the agenda, as it were. So it is overarching, and but they all the services need to continue to work together. I'm confident that we are on the right steps right now in order to see those change. You heard a lot of the different programs, MASH, Stepping Stones. There's loads of different things that are happening, and they're going in the right direction. And in terms of Welsh Government, I do believe that we have some excellent representation there in terms of having cabinet members' voices heard within Welsh Government, and again within Lynn Neagle being a great advocate of us and our services and our progression as well. So, you know, it's going to be an ongoing journey of pushing, and I will continue to do so.
I'm glad to hear that, Fiona, because I'm sure we were all eager to find out that our family unit and our social services and Jason's team would really welcome a little increase in finances. So the pressure is on you as well now.
Councillor Faith-Jones, you have your hand up. You had it up for quite a while.
Yes, sorry about that. It's to go back to question 20, which was put over by Councillor Crick, and we were on about those children with complex needs who are, you know, up the ladder, out of county often. And I just wondered, tying this in with the MIST team, do we see a need, and are there any plans to extend the MIST team to help with those children with really complex needs and to help their carers?
A simple answer to that is yes. I think because the MIST team are very effective. What we have seen is the MIST team has expanded across Gwent now. So whereas Tovine, I guess, with the pioneers of MIST, the effectiveness of that has been realised and recognised, and it has now been set up across across all of the local authority areas within Gwent. And it's set up very much, in fact, after this meeting, I'm going to a MIST regional partnership meeting where we look at what MIST can provide regionally and how we can tap into one another's resources. So there's continued discussions around how we utilise MIST and how we review MIST. What members will probably be aware of as well is that the MIST was previously resourced by Action for Children. And last year we brought MIST in-house to be managed and resourced within the local authority by Torvine. So it gives us, I think, a greater level of control over the service as well, which I think is really encouraging. Yeah, the answer is, I think it links back into the overall message within the report is, yes, we need more. So within whatever shape or sphere that looks, as far as foster placements go, whether it be a MIST placement or mainstream, yes.
Thank you.
And Jason, you had a supplementary comment.
I did.
On Veronica's question, or on whose question was it? On Councillor Jones's question.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I did. It was just to outline some of the, because you mentioned around the Welsh Government funding,
Yes.
and we do have, there are a number of grants that we have within the service that are obviously very well received and very welcome within the service, that provide for things like our rapid response and our family focused teams. A significant number there of that service is made up through grant funding, as is within the family placement team. There are elements within the family placement team that are made up through grant funding through Welsh Government. Obviously, the risk that come with any level of grant funding is it's time limited. And whilst it's great to set up a service when we have any grants come into place, we know that is very often time limited and comes with a risk. One of the things that often you can never be frustrated by being given money, but one of the things that can frustrate me occasionally when we receive any level of grant money are the timeframes that come with it. So we may be given a significant amount of money, but it may only come with, I guess, a set of terms and conditions that focus upon a 12-month or 24 months. And very often that is extended and extended and extended, but it doesn't give us the opportunity for any long-term planning. And that's a plea that I've made in a couple of different for us, is around that longevity of grant funding, so that we can, we've got our eyes set further down the horizon and looking at future generations particularly, rather than looking at, or which also includes looking at the here and now, but gives us a bit of a longer term ability to plan. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Jason.
Councillor Cross, would you like to come in?
Yeah, sorry. Thank you. Jason has kind of covered that really nicely, because I realised I used the language push, and it makes it sound like Welsh Government is, I've got to push at them, I've got to bully them into making them do what we want, but that's not how I visualise the relationship. And I just wanted to stress that I see them as a partner. I see some really helpful work and development going forward, and very positively, but also to stress that although initially that still needs to happen, I'm really keen to see more improved EIP services, early intervention and prevention services. That's where our focus really has to be, so that we don't have these children coming into foster care. The whole COVID pandemic, you'll have heard from your own residents about how it's affected them, how their mental health has been impacted. If we can get the right services to families before those children, those families go into crisis, that is a far better outcome, much better. So I just want to stress that, where my heart and push is right now is that's where I feel we need to really, stress our efforts.
Well, thank you very much. And Jacqueline, your hand is raised. Would you like to come in, please?
Yes, please. Thank you. It was just linked into the point that Jason made around time-limited grant funding and the difficulties that can pose. I just wanted to highlight that that's where we do have difficulties in terms of recruitment and retention, because understandably, people will feel quite unsettled if they're in a fixed-term post, and then as that fixed term post is coming to an end and we can't guarantee that we have further funding coming in the following year, those individuals will then look to seek more permanent employment elsewhere.
Yeah, perfectly. Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, the next couple of questions are going to be about the recommendations of the review, and I'm looking at paragraph 5.3, and why did the CSTP board, why did they not agree with the recommendation to implement a tiered system for fees to foster carers?
I think there were concerns from members of the Children's Services Transformation Programme Board that introducing a tiered system for foster carers would become very complicated. So, for example, if a foster carer was at the top tier, but then there was a view that they were no longer meeting the requirement to remain at that top tier, then it would be very difficult to bring them down to a lower tier if they already had children in placement with them, because we could be held over a barrel to a certain extent then as a local authority if the foster carers weren't happy to maintain that placement if we were to move them down to a lower tier. So I think there were concerns around those complications, but also I think I mentioned within the report about the national work that's being completed by the National Fostering Framework around the harmonisation of fees. And as part of that, they have sought legal advice, which is suggesting that any payment to foster carers above the national minimum allowance would need to be a flat rate fee. So, so that advice goes against the proposal of a tiered payment system.
Okay, thank you very much. And the next question is also about the CSTP board, and is why did the CSTP board not agree with the recommendation to recruiting an interim project manager or additional specialist resources?
In terms of an interim project manager, I think it was felt that it was something that we could manage ourselves internally. In terms of the additional specialist resources, there was a view that in light of the significant additional investment from Welsh Government in terms of recruitment and marketing, and the additional information that we have as a result of our research and the mosaic data, that we're in a much better position in terms of recruitment and marketing than we have been previously. So it was felt that we didn't need to have those additional specialist resources. And I think that would also have been with consideration of the financial situation within Children's Services as well.
Okay, thank you very much for that concise answer. Next question, and Councillor Janet Jones is to ask it.
Thank you, Chair. What would be the potential impact of not implementing those particular recommendations?
Sorry, do you mean the recommendations that haven't been agreed?
Yes.
In terms of the additional specialist resources, I suppose there would be a concern from the consultant's point of view that we wouldn't be able to increase our recruitment of foster carers. But that said, we have got that additional resource in terms of the regional marketing officer as a result of the Welsh Government funding. In terms of the project, not having a project manager, I don't think that there would be any implications as a result of not having a project manager. I think that I'm confident that we can manage that ourselves internally within the family placement team. In terms of, sorry, I didn't cover the tiered payment system. I think the tiered payment system is a really difficult one, because I can see the benefits of a tiered payment system, but I can also see the downfalls of a tiered system of payments. I think a tiered system of payments, one of the downsides might be that it might have a negative effect in terms of our ability to recruit new foster carers, because if, for example, somebody considering starting their journey as a foster carer sees that they actually have to jump through a number of levels before reaching the highest banding, that might actually stop them from applying to become a foster or inquiring to become a foster carer in the first place. So I can see the arguments for both sides, but I think ultimately for me, if we've received legal advice that suggests that any additional payment needs to be a flat rate payment, then for me we would be foolish to ignore that legal advice.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor, no one wants to come in. Councillor Crick, will you ask the next question, please?
Yes, sorry, I just had a problem, a blip with my machine, and it died on question 24. So we're now on 25. And I'm referring to, again, to paragraph 5.3. Have you costed implementing all the recommendations or each of the recommendations individually?
The costings that we have completed to date, that were completed by the consultant, are in the tables in 6.1. However, what that doesn't include is the any costings in relation to fees and allowances for foster carers, because obviously at the point of this outline business case, we don't know what that uplift to fees and allowances will be, so that hasn't been included at this point. But the additional staffing in terms of social workers has been included within that, as has some of the other additional costings, but it's not full costings there. And this was an outline business case, an acknowledgement of the fact that we needed further steer before we could go on to complete the full business case.
Thank you.
And the last question is concerning the production of the full business case. So the question is, what are the next steps in developing it? What timetable are you working to? And how will you eventually decide what recommendations will be going forward and what recommendations will definitely be rejected?
I think in terms of timescales for the full business case, I think I'm quite confident that we could complete that full business case within the next 3 months. There's been a lot of work to date in terms of the research that we've undertaken, the mapping exercises that we've undertaken. So a lot of the detail is already there. It's just about pulling together some of that information. There are some parts of this that I think are far more straightforward than others. So, for example, the additional staffing required within the family placement team, I think that for me, that's really quite clear cut. The elements that are far more complicated for me relate to the fees and allowances in particular, because if we make a decision prior to the outcome of the Welsh Government review of the national minimum allowances and prior to the final report coming out from the National Fostering Framework, then whatever uplift we give now, we'll potentially be looking at a more significant financial impact when those two pieces of work are completed. So I think those are some of the things that may potentially delay the full business case unless we decide to separate elements of it out. I think it will also depend on whether, for example, we've already got a lot of the detail there in terms of what additional benefits we could provide and what that would cost. But if, for example, we were to consider looking at the council tax, I would suggest that that would need to come in a separate report outside of the full business case, or there would be a delay to the outcome of the full business case, because I think that's quite a significant piece of work.
Okay.
I think that's really relevant about chunk, or there are elements of the full business case that we'll almost have to chunk up and take on in bite-sized pieces rather than the whole amount.
Okay, thank you very much. This concludes the question and answer session of the meeting. So I would like to thank officers and the executive member, Councillor Cross, for attending the meeting this morning and giving up their valuable time to engage in a discussion with us. You may now leave the meeting whilst the committee decides on its recommendations, which we will submit to Councillor Cross. So thank you very much for your attendance, and we can then move on to our scrutiny of the report and our recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you,
members.
Chair. Thank you. Thank you, members.
So I'm on page 38, item paragraph 8.1. So we have reviewed the findings of the review. Are we satisfied that the review is appropriate? I think is the first question we have to ask.
Mm-hmm.
Do members feel that the review has been carried out appropriately?
Sorry, Chair, I haven't put my hand up, but I certainly feel it's quite an in-depth review on the service. I think they've covered a lot of the points. I just wish we could ask for their wish list. What would they tick off first in, the recommendations? And they've highlighted a few things, so I think we'll pick those up in recommendations too.
I think it's a very good review that they've carried out, Chair. I would agree with Councillor Seaborn. It's evident that they are restricted at the moment because they're awaiting these other reviews to come out.
Of course, yes.
But if we could perhaps suggest that those items that could be regarded almost as a quick fix were pursued for the moment, because there's still quite a body of work involved in that, and then look to implement the other issues when they come in.
Yes, that
Cheers.
is.
Yeah, sorry.
Yes, sorry, Rebecca.
Okay, so the second part of that scrutiny activity, if I can just draw your attention to the recommendations of the review. So that's on page 26 at 4.4. So you'll see that, as we've just discussed towards the end of your meeting, there, the two recommendations that the board had disagreed with.
Yeah.
So can I therefore assume that you're in support of that? So you also accept the others, but like Councillor Crick has just said, in regards to those two that are awaiting findings of Welsh Government reviews, that perhaps they hold off making any firm decision on that either way, accept or reject those two until the outcomes of those reviews.
Yes.
Is that what you were ascertaining to, Councillor Crick? Yeah.
That is a good recommendation, Rebecca. Rose, do you want to come in? You muted, Rose.
Trying to take my hand and my mute at the same time. So I think we need to have a look at obviously the recommendation, and I would say that we should recommend waiting on the fees and allowances until after the outcome. But I wondered whether or not it might be pertinent, because we are the lowest, whether or not we could we could increase it slightly to maybe one of the normal or the average costs within Wales at this moment, or our counties. So therefore it wouldn't be such a jump if the increase was substantially more when the Welsh Government review comes along. I wonder if we could do it in a stepping stone, so we could actually, encourage our foster carers to come up to a certain standard before they're actually told they've got to come up to a certain standard.
Yes, that is a good recommendation, Rose. Okay. Faye?
Faye.
Yeah, hi. I was just sort of mulling over what they said, and they said obviously it's very important that we can work with families to stop this before it happens, often children coming into foster care. And I just wonder, could we make a recommendation that we work across social services and education a lot more than we are now, possibly, to help, and health, to help, stop more children going into care, and have programs of work for schools and things where parenting and all is seen as very important. I know that's broad ranging and it's a little bit motherhood and apple pie, but I just wondered, could we make that as one of our recommendations?
Yes,
So,
certainly, Faye.
Yeah, Councillor Cross also sort of mentioned the prevention work, and obviously noting that nowhere in those recommendations for this sort of business plan going forward does it really reference prevention. So perhaps, yeah, you could recommend that. That is also a consideration when they're developing this. Sorry, just to go back to the recommendations that were accepted or rejected by the board, there was the one about the interim project manager, and obviously Jacqueline stated that they had the capacity and they would rather do that in-house. So you support her views on that they're happy to. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So the three persons with their hands up. Rose and Faye have spoken, so I'll ask Janet to come in first then.
It worried me when they said that we are very reliant on grant aid, and also the plans that we want are not sort of short term, they have to be long term. And how is that going to be sustainable if we don't know what finances are coming into us? It might be sort of a fixed contract for 12 months, but that doesn't give assurance to us attracting social workers, and that worries me. And I would that we have to explore everything possible for extended finances, for longevity of our plans within social services and family placement.
Yes.
Rose, do you want that actually as a recommendation, or am I noting that more as a concern in the sort of overall comments?
I'd like to say that we could a recommendation.
Yes,
yeah, actually, mine was the same, Chair. So I would recommend that we highlight to Welsh Government the concerns around time limits on grant funding, and for a longer term financial plan to meet our children and services, family services obligations.
Thank you.
Faye?
Adding on from that, I just wondered, are we looking at other funding streams as well as Welsh Government? Could we suggest, I mean, that brilliant piece of work was done by Action for Children, which started off the MISS project. I just want to make sure that we're open to other funding streams as well, and that we're working collaboratively with well-known charities and things.
Yeah. Chair, it was originally that was NSPCC, and then they changed their name to Action for Children. So yeah, I mean, the Action for Children have a certain amount of funding that we could perhaps look into applying for. So
okay, so I think we have reviewed the findings. We need to determine whether we think that the proposals will improve things. That's the salient question.
Yeah, Chair, I've got one more recommendation.
I've got one more recommendation. Sorry.
Yeah, that we look into the incentives for our foster carers and link the proposal for Torfaen Leisure Trust, etc. We separately look in, or perhaps pass it over to resources to look at a council tax reduction for our foster carers. After all, they're giving their home up for our children, our corporate parenting children. So whether or not we can make a case for that.
Thank you. There was also just one more from me, Chair, with regards to the whole sort of marketing aspect. They did mention, and with the conversion rate from initial inquiries to moving through the process, and Jacqueline did mention whether they could perhaps look to put out some more detailed information to people in our marketing prior to them making the inquiry, so that they are better informed at that stage.
Yeah, I had that one.
Yes, I'm Mira Bex.
I think we. Sorry, I think we need somewhere to stress the need to move from the private sector.
Yes.
Which is really what this is all geared to do.
Yeah.
But I think it needs to be stressed because of the savings that will be made. And that then the monies can be spread more equitably across our own service.
Yes.
So members, just going back to Councillor Overton's point there, are you satisfied that these recommendations that they are looking to take on board will achieve a better position?
I personally think so. I think they've done this in a very measured way, and with the recommendations coming from the Welsh Government, I think that they've got a good way forward.
Bex, is there something around the early intervention of services that Councillor Cross mentioned? Is there some recommendation that we can, it's about joined up of everything, isn't it? Sure start, education. Is there something?
Yeah, I can see that into the recommendation that you made with regards to more prevention. And reference to that, because there isn't any sort of reference within the recommendations from the review.
Okay.
About a work stream around prevention as well.
Thanks.
Okay.
I muted myself because the telephone rang, so I've unmuted now. So are we unanimous in thinking that the review will improve services?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, we're hopeful.
Yes.
Okay, so we can submit our decision to the executive member. So we're going to.
Chair, sorry, Bex, did we pick up on staffing? Did we the need to increase the staffing? I think there's something around there that we perhaps need to pick up on as well, because they're under-resourced, they're overworked, and perhaps we need to pick up on that point as well. I'm sorry about that. That was an asterisk at the bottom of my scribbles.
That's what comes out of the business review, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, so
if I'll type all those recommendations up formally and email those to all the members of the committee for you to approve before they then get sent on to the executive.
Thank you, Rebecca. So the next item on the agenda is the item for the next meeting. Are we decided on the next item until after council?
So Chair, what will happen now is obviously you've got annual council in a fortnight or so, and there may be changes to the committee. So the next meeting of this committee now will be the visioning session held in June or July, which will determine the work programme for the year ahead. So there is no standalone item for the next meeting. It'll be the visioning session.
Okay, thank you. And so
we've had more vision sessions than we have had.
Yes, because there was an hiatus in the committee meeting, wasn't there, due to COVID? So I don't know whether I will be in the chair after full council. We'll have to have a group meeting, and Councillor Bevan and then can put the names forward to which committees we decide we're sitting on. So it's been a pleasure to chair the last 3 meetings. Thank you, Rebecca, for your excellent work during my period as chair, and I'd like to thank members for their excellent contributions. And,
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Richard, for all you've done.
Thank you very much. I think I will retain membership of this committee if I'm not chairing it. So I'll see you. Hopefully, see you all in June, and I hope I'll see Councillor Seaborn at the Education and the Schools Monitoring Subcommittee. I think I'll be retaining membership of those 2 committees. So I'd like to thank you very much for your attendance this morning, and hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Richard.
Have a good spring
Bye
back.
now.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you,
Bye.